I use you.
Yeah.
All right.
Sit here, it'll put them.
Well, we'll just fingers
Okay.
crossed, right?
Okay.
It does.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's
Yes. All right, it does focus, so.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Oh,
we
no,
have
I,
three speakers. No, you go sit wherever you like. Oh, I'll sit up here. And we are Anita, Riley, and Kia. It's hard when you teach online.
It isn't.
Well, all.
You want us all?
Yeah,
Okay.
all three people can sit up here. Anita,
Nice to meet you.
Anita, Riley, and. Okay, great. I'm very pleased to begin our Women's Studies Conference. But first I need to apologize to all the students I emailed, asking them to join us, who were probably Christian, and realizing when I was planning this, I wasn't thinking that it would fall on Good Friday and Easter weekend. And I think a lot of students were not happy about that. So I apologize for that. But thinking about today as Good Friday and realizing that many people around the world are mourning the death of Jesus Christ, I think we can argue that his message was one of love, peace, and compassion. And I think the messages of love, peace, and compassion are particularly poignant for our conference, especially the first two papers that focus on Gaza and what's going on with Palestinians and the complexity of identity, language, and oppression. Before Anita begins with the presentation on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, I'd like to share that last night I was watching a YouTube channel called Judging Freedom, and it's run by Judge Andrew Napolitano, and he interviewed Professor John Mersheimer, who's an expert on Israel, and wrote a very important book called The Israel Lobby with Professor Stephen Walt. And it examined how the amount of money that goes into lobbying politicians in Washington, D.C. can be very, very important when we make decisions about going to war, and we have to question on whose behalf, and funding particular countries and funding their military. And these are the types of issues that people on this panel will be talking about today. And one thing that I thought was very important and timely is that Professor Mersheimer suggested that Israel wants the United States to go into and start a war with Iran. And that the reason it wants to start a war with Iran is that it will take the world's attention off of Israel onto Iran. And while that's going on, covered across the media, Israel can complete what many are describing, including Professor John Mersheimer, as a genocide, which is, taking away the native population of Palestine, Palestinians, and to, from Israel's perspective, finally cleanse the Gaza Strip of all Palestinians. And so I think, these are very important topics. They're timely, and I think this will be a fascinating conference. And I look forward to everyone hearing their talks. And if Anita wants to begin, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Anita Ornelas. Today, I'm going to discuss my paper about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. On December 29th, 2023, South Africa filed its request for provisional measures with the International Court of Justice, alleging that Israel had committed and continues to commit genocide against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. South Africa accuses Israel of violating the Genocide Convention, including Israel's 75-year apartheid, 56-year occupation of the Palestinian territory, and 16-year blockade of the Gaza Strip. Israel rejects these allegations. So I thought it would be helpful to talk about what is the Genocide Convention. The Genocide Convention is the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Crimes of Genocide. It was a landmark international treaty adopted by the United Nations in 1948. What is the International Court of Justice? The ICJ, also known as the World Court, was established by the United Nations General Assembly and Security Council and is the highest United Nations legal body. It has 15 judges who are voted into office by the UN General Assembly and Security Council. If a judge of the nationality of one of the parties to a case is not on the court, the party may nominate its own judge ad hoc for the purpose of the case. When I wrote this paper, I had limited knowledge of the conflict in Gaza. I understood the fundamental reason for the conflict, but did not comprehend all the situation's complexities. The readings helped me gain a non-biased perspective on the humanitarian crisis. In the past, I saw people posting and protesting on social media and in the news. Still, I was unable to form an opinion either way because of my lack of understanding of the conflict. The filing was in response to the rising humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Since October 7th, 2023, the conflict between the Israeli and Palestinian communities has been hugely influenced by the media. Both sides try to explain why people should side with them. Media, especially social media, is a complicated dynamic. In this day and age, depending on what news or social media outlet you're watching, the representation of events in the media is often biased and possibly false. Thus, it can shape public perception and understanding, influencing cognitive development and awareness. For example, in understanding South Africa versus Israel at the International Court of Justice, South Africa's application to the ICJ addressed how the Israeli media completely shielded its audience from the images of suffering in Gaza. I was not aware of this until I read this article. Personally, it makes me wonder what else is being kept from the Israeli people. The filing also exposed to the world the children who have been left on their own after bombs wiped out entire families and displaced 1.9 million people. More than 80% of Gazans have been displaced. Unfortunately, the Israeli media is hiding the truth of this conflict. As a mom, this is very upsetting and it concerns me. Applying the human development theory to the situation in Gaza involves the examination of physical, cognitive, social, and emotional impacts on the individuals and communities. Variations in perspectives depend on how an individual processes and comprehends the complex legal and ethical considerations of the conflict in Gaza. In general, our cognitive development is based on how we think, our age, our background, and what we've been exposed to throughout our life. It is challenging to take a stance on whether or not Israel is guilty of genocide. I do think they're guilty of fueling a substantial humanitarian crisis within the Palestinian community. At the end of 2023, the death toll in Gaza exceeded 20,000 civilians, with over 52,000 people injured so far. Those numbers have likely increased in the last few years. The majority of those killed have been women and children. Another thing I wasn't aware of until I started this class and reading the articles. This is something that I have a hard time understanding. However, I would like to talk to people on both sides someday to understand their views better. As of now, I think the conflict in Gaza has showcased two perspectives. one of the Palestinian people and one of the Jewish people. The Palestinian people believe that the Israeli people have oppressed them. In contrast, the Israeli people believe that they are entitled to establish their homeland after generations of persecution. On January 26, 2024, the ICJ issued an order requiring Israel to take all measures to prevent any acts contrary to the Genocide Convention. The court did not order Israel to suspend its military campaign. Israel's defense of the claim made by South Africa was that the charges were baseless and essentially deflected that South Africa was helping Hamas. Israel further stated that the military action was in response to the Hamas attack on October 7th, 2023. The ICJ did express concern for the fate of the hostages held by Hamas and recognized the horrifying situation in the region. The war has had a significant death toll and a widespread suffering on both sides. The conflict in Gaza has had a substantial impact on the relationship between the Palestinian and Israeli people. Social development theories address community impacts and social structures. The Palestinian people have expressed the displacement of their social structures due to the constant bombing of their communities. The Palestinian people experience frequent destruction of their homes and infrastructure, which causes harm to their emotional development. The lack of community and support systems can cause significant emotional distress to the Palestinian people. Emotional development theories help people understand how to cope with trauma, fear, and grief. As a community, we must foster empathy and compassion for everyone involved in this horrific situation in Gaza. I know it sometimes can be hard to see a different perspective, but to grow, we must attempt to see the opposing view and make strides in a community. Internationally, there has been a global response to the conflict on both sides. However, we must focus on humanitarian efforts, consider our moral obligations, and the ethical impacts of genocide. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Anita. Riley, would you like to begin?
Hello, I'm Riley Ratcliffe. To kind of recap what Anita was saying, on December 29th, 2023, South Africa requested that the International Court of Justice immediately sanction provisional measures, including a cessation of Israel's military occupation in Gaza, on the basis that Israel is committing genocide and violating its agreement to the Convention Against Genocide decades earlier. The ICJ focuses on international law as it applies to states, not individuals, and it could be years before a ruling is made concerning Israel's implication in genocide. The International Court of Justice is not composed entirely of Western countries, but that does not exempt it from inadvertently promoting Western ideals. We have been conditioned and propagandized to think a certain way by Western rulers, and this has effectively impacted all of our thought processes, no matter how hard we try to escape or ignore it. This occurs even in the most supposedly neutral places in the world, such as the ICJ. One thing that I noticed while reading the articles on the International Court of Justice case of South Africa versus Israel was the specific word choice used when describing each side of the situation. Although South Africa has brought this case in defense of Palestine, ICJ documents have not been unaffected by the linguistic patterns of Western imperialism. It's essential to take a look at some of these patterns and themes and unpack the ways in which we have been conditioned to think about the colonizers and the colonized. The State of Israel was established in 1948. In an article titled Understanding South Africa versus Israel at the International Court of Justice, written by Chimen Keitner, it is recognized that Jews were finally able to establish an independent state in their historical homeland after generations of persecution and pogroms and exile. Using this term homeland implies that, as Financial Times columnist Adam Tooze brought up, Israel is justified in their mission by theology, as an instance of classic settler colonial ideology. The act of fleeing religious persecution has been used as a scapegoat in the murder of indigenous peoples for centuries. This is precisely the way the United States was founded. In Europeans' attempt to escape religious persecution, millions of Native Americans were killed and displaced. In order to continue with Western imperialism, people must be pacified and violence must seem justified. Defending Israel's brutality, specifically in the name of creating a Jewish haven, checks both of these boxes. Another strategy that works to justify Israel's brutality is their fixation on October 7th, 2023. It is noted that further evidence of the depravity of Hamas militants on October 7th and 8th continues to emerge. And as Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad continue to hold over 100 hostages in Gaza. Israel focuses so intensely on this specific date, whereas Palestinians have been murdered, tortured, kidnapped, and displaced since the founding of Israel, the occupation of Palestine. The focus on October 7th explicitly allows for Israel to take a stance as the victim in this situation. They use this incident in order to garner sympathy for a conflict that they started because it is one of the most recent notable displays of Palestinian armed resistance and offers an easy target for Western sympathy. It is yet another silencing tactic, emphasizing that Palestinians must put up with the violence because when they do not, they will be seen as the perpetrators. Separate from the ICJ, the International Criminal Court focuses on prosecuting individuals involved in international crimes. The ICC prosecutor has stated that the attacks against innocent Israeli civilians on the 7th of October represent some of the most serious international crimes that shock the conscience of humanity, crimes which the ICC was established to address. Not only are other international justice entities honing in on October 7th, but they are also consistent in referring to Israelis as innocent, further allowing Israel to claim victimhood in this situation. The point of this argument is not that these Israeli citizens are not innocent. Instead, I want to highlight the lack of innocence given to Palestinians. Instead of extending the same rhetoric of hostages to Palestinians that Israel has kidnapped, they're often referred to as prisoners, subtly implying that there has been some sort of wrongdoing on their part, justifying their custody. Small word choices like this hold a serious weight in power imbalances like these because they subconsciously affect the way we perceive each group of people. Through their entitlement, exclusion of unflattering actions, and intentional labels, Israel uses a fabricated version of their victim's story in order to secure Western support. This has led to the widespread, inflated notion that it is anti-Semitic to deny Israel the right to behave in the early 21st century in ways that European powers and the US did in the 19th and 20th centuries. For the ICJ and the ICC to be putting out statements that use vocabulary broadly adopted by Israel is to allow Israel to continue to control the narrative and silence the group that has been actively occupied and oppressed for decades. We should be constantly dissecting how we think and speak about oppressed peoples, especially in presumed neutral spaces. It's important to challenge language and thought processes that, although unintentional, are harmful to those constantly being spoken over. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith.
And Kia.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kia, and I'm here to talk to you today about foster care and intersectionality, a little bit of a different approach from my predecessors. I'm not here from an agency, but merely to share my own experiences as a foster parent and what it has taught me about the complexities that make up each of us. I became involved in foster care because I thought I could provide a loving home to children in my community. I was excited to get started and took all the necessary steps to get certified. I attended classes, seminars, learned about the court process, child WIC codes, documents required, and everything that the county would expect of me as a foster parent. I felt very equipped and ready when I got the first call. But nothing could fully prepare me for all of the emotions that I would feel getting involved with these families and their lives. The first time I ever set foot in a courtroom was when I sat in the gallery and heard a case plan laid out before me for the first time. A case plan is the services required of a family to reunify with their children in relation to why the child was removed in the first place. I heard as judges and lawyers explain to the family what was expected of them and listened as the social services identified barriers to care and how they were going to address them. There was transportation barriers. The agency would provide bus vouchers or other programs. If there was housing problems, housing referrals could be made. And if there was substance abuse issues, therapy, rehabilitation, and testing could be offered. On the surface, this seemed like a very simple process. The first case plan I heard, I felt like this family was going to reunify fairly quickly, and it would be an easy shut-down case. When we had a follow-up court date a couple months later and no progress had been made on the case plan, I selfishly grew judgmental of the family, thinking that their lack of haste in the case must be directly related to how much they cared about their children. There are some scars that lead to a barrier in care that are not as easily identified, and that's what foster care has taught me. The mom in my first case grew up in a domestic violence household, as did her mother before her. It's easy to tell someone from the outside looking in to leave an unhealthy relationship, but it's much harder when you're living in it. If a healthy relationship has never been modeled before you, how do you even know where to begin? And the thought of leaving your only support system in a time of turmoil can seem overwhelming and impossible. A lot of the families involved in child welfare were involved in child welfare themselves when they were children, and this is a cycle that's not so easily broken. For some of these families, it seemed easier to postpone a court date or postpone their case plan rather than identifying and addressing childhood traumas and demons in a therapy session. That was a Pandora's box that some people weren't able to open. I learned a lot in my time within the child welfare system. I learned that substance abuse is a disease and should be treated as such, and we don't yet have a way to go forward. I learned that the mental health crisis is a real thing and not just a talking point for late night television. And I also learned that there's no villains in this story. Social workers are kind and caring people who want nothing more than to bring families back together and not the villains that we make them out to be on TV. I learned that parents involved in child welfare love and care for their children, and the readiness in which they finish their case plan is not reflective of their true feelings. I learned that some things that seemed like rolling hills to me were steep and unpassable mountains to others. Intersectionality is about seeing all the parts that make up a person and who they are, and not just what's on the surface. Each of us is carrying around a story and scars that we don't want seen, and we don't all have to lay out our story on a courtroom floor for other people to hear. I would encourage all of us, as we see people who are sometimes on the fringes of society, to treat them with grace and respect and realize that they are walking their own story. It's easy when you see a parent involved in child welfare to ask, why did you do that? Or what have you done? Instead of thinking to ourselves, what happened to you?
Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to open this up for conversation. And people can ask some questions if they have, or make some comments, feel free. We'll start with Anita and talking about genocide in Gaza, which made me want to cry, the baby making noise, and just thinking about all the women and children, and I think that often when we think about war, we think of men. And the war, it's not even a war. People are debating the term genocide, but some very prominent people are comfortable now using that term because there is an ongoing drip attempt to eliminate this population. And so what I'm wondering is, why do you think a lot of people don't know that it's women and children? That you said you learn this.
I feel like kind of what I said, the media, and kind of some of the stuff Riley said, the media and other people control the narrative.
Yes.
And so I think that's a big factor. So unless we do our own research, but even then, especially right now, we don't know. Is it the
What's
truth?
real, what's not.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just,
Very far.
I guess kind of how I ended it is talking to people on both sides. But
Mhm.
I was actually nervous to write this paper because I thought, oh, I don't want people to be upset because people feel so strongly on both sides about this.
Yeah.
So I tried to frame it in a way where it's just talking about people,
Yes.
the people that it impacts, right?
Children,
Right,
women,
children, women, I mean,
fathers,
yeah, right,
grandfathers.
communities.
Yeah, communities, yeah, and I just think that, I think that is, how we talk about compassion, these, Good Friday, love, compassion, trying to understand, and really look at how the conflict is framed and how information flows. And this has been going on since 1948, where in 1948, 750,000 Palestinians were removed from what is Jerusalem, the main cities. I mean, those older homes were built by them, and they had to flee into the West Bank and into Gaza. And so, you know, who's telling their story? And, but I think, do you think the internet has had a lot to do with, you know, people becoming more aware now?
Yes, but then the other side of it is they're also getting information that might not be true.
Yeah.
Especially right now where some information is,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we don't, you know, there's not as many red flags as before maybe.
I would say our mainstream media is a little bit more problematic, but when you go on like Instagram and Twitter, you have a more realistic view about the actual stories.
Mhm.
The journalists that are, you know, not necessarily in mainstream telling their story, and I think your article and how your presentation hits on that. It's like, we know this information because of the avenues.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, yeah, like you said, media is a toss-up, but I think because we have Instagram, Twitter, we have the
TikTok.
Mhm.
TikTok especially.
I
And
mean,
it helps you follow people that are there possibly, it's their story
Mhm.
versus it being mainstream.
Going through the filters,
Yeah,
the
you're
news
actually getting
media,
it
People on the ground.
a lot of
Yeah.
time firsthand.
right?
And I have you know, I'm an older student. I have a college age son, so he keeps me informed. Younger people also keep me informed of things.
Because it's so powerful to hear from a particular person's story, whichever side they're on.
Yeah.
Rather than it going through the filter of commercial media who have to please, you know, the people who are paying their bills.
I did see something on the news where the people on both sides, they said, we just want to talk, we just want this to be done.
Yeah.
So there are actually people on both sides that just want this to.
Probably the majority. Mm. Well, it's fascinating. Thank you very much for your. Riley, you took this topic a very different angle, very powerful angle as well. And, you know, talking about Western ideals. And that is, you know, that is often said, we are, you know, Israel is a democratic society, a liberal democracy with Western ideals.
It's the villainization of
Yeah.
the East.
Yeah.
The global East.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think Riley reminded us of how powerful our words are.
Yes.
Like she teaches me so much every day. But just, I never thought about that and the way that we word things and how it affects us subconsciously. We just don't even think about. So that was pretty powerful.
It is so powerful because Gaza has been described as an open air prison because nobody gets in or gets out without it going through literal prison fortress. And so to have, you know, to be able to create the label victim when you're not in the prison as a jailed in victim is really kind of a miracle that they're able to do that. That is such a deft use of language and very manipulative.
It is.
Yeah. I thought that your relating the colonization of Israel is just another colonization.
It is.
That we're living in a colonized. We're right now on indigenous land.
Yes.
I mean, literally stolen land. We are, the table is on stolen land. And so, you know, ongoing the colonization around the world is an ongoing subjectivity and often just looking for resources. But in this case, it's really creating a country for a particular group of people. And in the name of escaping oppression, they're the oppressors. So it must be very difficult to be an Israeli and try and, you know, work that through your head.
Yeah.
And justify it.
Yeah. It reminds me of the way I hear more often, I can't believe the way that we treated Native Americans when we arrived to America. And it's very much widely known as like a genocide and like a heartbreaking event. And then to turn on your phone and see the exact same thing happening present day is really, I feel like, helpful to look at it that way, because I think it can make that click in some people's head.
And I know for some Israelis, when they think about us, they're like, well, you guys did it, why can't we do it?
Exactly.
It's like, so there's this evolution. Do you think that there's been an evolution of law and justice and a consideration of Native populations? Because, raw power maybe doesn't work as well, or maybe it does. It's in this particular case, it doesn't seem to be working. And, I wonder if the world is shifting into a better place where there's more of a greater respect for sovereignty rather than, New World Order, globalist kind of perspective.
I think socially, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think when it gets financial and political is whenever I don't know how much progress really has been made.
The corporatization of the world.
Yeah.
They're gonna use our military to get what they need and in the name of
and the billions of
prosperity.
dollars. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating talk. And I wanted to raise the notion of being called an anti-Semitic. Now, what do you think of that trope?
There are so many Jewish people in support of Palestine.
Yes.
And framing, it's two things can be true at the same time. My support for Palestine has nothing to do with a dislike or a hatred of Jewish people. And so, yeah, I think that it's another victimhood statement.
Or just a calculated, powerful way to try to keep getting what you want. If it's a drip since 1948 to get rid of this population, you're gonna just pull out of your pocket everything you can absolutely do to keep that going. And it's also always fascinating to think about who you're not allowed to critique. Yes. In terms of who has the power to make you as an individual feel you're not allowed to critique foreign policy.
Absolutely. I mean, the free speech issues happening right now, and the deportation and like abductions that are happening of citizens just for speaking out against Palestine or against Israel. Is really, really crazy.
Yeah, people losing jobs, not being hired, get on the hit list. Yeah, now it's and what's really ironic is that who are Semites? They're the native population. That's the Semitic population, or the Arabs.
Yeah.
And so it's Ashkenazi European Jews who have mostly colonized a Semitic population.
Yeah.
So to even say they're Semitic is not quite true. No. It's fascinating. It is. And Kia talks about another kind of war, really. And it's in the way we as a society kind of help or not help families, and that the insensitivity that you describe toward people who need help, and the way help is given or not given through a court system. And as you admitted, and it's not easy to admit, but we all have made judgments about people not being able to get their act together. And I think that the barriers to care, the way we try to fix each individual barrier. It sounded like rather than looking at the whole person, and I just think that that's a very important distinction that you learned and are sharing. And I'm wondering, how do you think that, is there a way to help with that?
I think a lot of the people involved in child welfare, it's largely disproportionately Black and brown people and people that do come from generational poverty and generational trauma. And so I think some of it is not identifying what they have been through, but also I feel like the people in that population might not realize to the degree of disadvantage that they are facing against other people to even know where to begin to ask for help. And I think the intentions can definitely be in the right place sometimes with wanting to offer these support services. But when they're not being met or not being successful at these different intervals within like a court system, how it's laid out, it can be easy for everyone involved to just think, well, we gave you all of the help and you're just not doing what's asked of you, instead of really identifying like, well, why and what is a true barrier beyond the things identified in court, like what's the mental roadblock
And that sort of thing.
Just even the proper support system.
Yeah.
right? Because I mean, I think about my kids, if they needed something, I'm there, my family's there, we have a big family. But think about these children who, like you said, they grew up in a situation. And then they don't have their parents.
Right, or their support system is even more unhealthy than they are. And so it's a very cyclical cycle. And I think I knew that going in, that it was a cycle, but when you realize how entrenched the cycle really is, it's a little bit mind-boggling.
And I think you raised the topic of generational violence. And when you look at the colonization of this country and all the violence that entailed, and you look at slavery and all the violence associated with that, and that violence becomes part of human development throughout the cycle of family. And you wonder how you can help combat that, stop those cycles, and create, because I agree with you completely that in order to create healthy relationships, you have to know what one looks like. And if you don't know what one looks like, it can be uncomfortable to be with somebody who knows how to be in a healthy relationship. And so sometimes it's oil and vinegar, even if you oil and water, even if you think that that situation you would be able to learn. It's an individual thing, and I think you're raising so many important points, and especially that trauma can be hard to deal with. And so you have this trauma, it's being manifest in every aspect of your life, but you don't even want to go there because it's too much.
Yeah, and I think especially like there are some areas like domestic violence that I think knows no income limit, as we all know. But if you live in a big house with a big plot of land, your neighbors aren't going to hear violence to report it, versus if you live in a small apartment and you have a shared wall with someone, then that neighbor is more likely to call on you. So I feel like even within domestic violence, there is still an unfair or disproportional amount of impoverished people getting it reported versus a well-off person. And I think a lot of these people have an exceptional amount of trauma. And not only are we asking them to unpack it and work through it, but in a very public way of there's follow-up, hearings with where are you at with X, Y, and Z. So you have to first decide to unpack all of your trauma and then do it in such a public way where you're addressing in front of multiple people where you're at, what have you done, what have you worked through. I think that's a massive ask for anyone, let alone someone who just doesn't have a lot of tools in their tool belt. And I think, you know, one thing that I really learned through my experience is like, we are not all born with the same tools in our tool belt. We do not all have the same resources, whether that is mentally or emotionally or supportive resources. And some of these asks just feel massive. And so it just seems easier to just avoid it. And I feel like that's where a lot of the stigma can come in of like, oh, well, they must not care because they didn't even try. But some of the asks just feel too big.
It's not a one size fits all type of thing, and that's how it seems like these systems are in place, is a one size fits all, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that the additional trauma on the child of taking that child out of that bad situation into another situation, do you think that that is the solution?
It's really tricky because I feel like each situation is different because there have been situations where the child is, you know, in imminent danger or death. So of course you need to remove them, but the removal is also a trauma.
Yes.
And then on top of the trauma the parent is facing, now the child has a trauma and now the family has a trauma of this removal. And so it's just such a delicate dance of you need to make sure everyone is protected and alive. And we've all seen cases where there wasn't enough action done by CPS and somebody was injured or killed, and there's an outrage of why weren't they removed. But then in the same sense, there's kids that people feel like were removed too easily or too quickly. And it just doesn't feel like you said, like a one size fits all. It feels like each situation is so unique and different. And the additional trauma of removal, I feel like requires additional resources and help to address now a new trauma as well.
Do you feel like the system is so overwhelmed with these situations?
Yeah, and they've definitely increased. I mean, as we've seen fentanyl increase in other areas of our lives, it's definitely hit child welfare as well. I will say in all my years of being involved, I've never met a social worker that wasn't an amazing and caring person. And so I feel like they have an exceptionally large caseload because there's an exceptional need in the community. It's a very hard job that not a lot of people seek out to do. You have a lot of people angry at you all the time. So I feel like they're understaffed, they're overworked. Yeah. But yeah, it just doesn't feel like there's like this very simple solution that we would all hope for.
And what percentage of the families that you're familiar with, or just generally speaking, do you think are dealing with substance abuse?
I would say all but one of the families I dealt
okay.
with.
Now, this really is a war. And with all the resources that the United States has and all the surveillance technology, what do you think is going on with the ability for these drug cartels to just have free reign over our population?
Yeah, it's crazy. And I think the substance abuse is usually a symptom of an underlying problem, whether that's childhood trauma or like an undiagnosed or untreated mental health. I really don't think anyone ever wakes up and just decides that they want to start abusing substances. There's always something that leads to it. And there's definitely a massively increasing substance abuse problem, but we also see an increasing mental health crisis that's not being addressed. And so it's kind of like which one came first. But the availability and the ease of substances, it's definitely, if you're already in a vulnerable position and already feeling like you don't have any other resources to cling to, having that just be everywhere is an unfortunate reality.
And a healthcare system that is it's so expensive. I mean,
Very
and
expensive.
so it's easier to self-medicate on the street. And I really, was just touched by you saying if there's no villains.
Oh, yeah, there really isn't.
There are no villains here. And it's just trying to solve problems as they come along in the best way you can. And do you see the arc going up, positive, or how are we doing?
I would say it ebbs and flows. I think until we get the fentanyl crisis under control,
Mhm.
I think we're on a slow upward trajectory. I think there is more awareness about mental health and there is less of a stigma, and I think that can and will help things in the long run. So there are areas we're making improvements, I feel like as a society to help people, but I feel like we're also up against some challenging, seem like impossible situations as well.
If you had your ability to create public policy in the United States and make changes, what would you argue for?
I would argue for mandatory rehab. And I think that there's a lot, what I have seen in case plans is a lot of voluntary outpatient, you check in during the day, you check out at night, or coupled with therapy. But I think if you go home at night and your circle is also substance abuse users or people who are not there to help you better your life, I just think the temptation is so strong. And I think the parents that have been super successful have gone into an inpatient rehab, not had contact with the outside world for 30 days or whatever, and those ones have come out so much more successful because they've had the ability to actually clear their mind and
Their physical.
yeah.
Yeah, oh, that's a great idea. And if you had foreign policy, the ability to create foreign policy for the United States, what would you suggest?
That is such a long list. I mean, I don't even know where to start. Probably starting with not sending billions of dollars to Israel when we so obviously need it in so many areas.
Take that money and
Yeah, step one.
step one, don't fund the genocide.
Yeah. Yeah.
Step two?
I don't know, step one is.
Step one.
Yeah, I don't know, there's a long list. I think not funding it, not,
No.
educating one
Mhm.
another better about
Mhm.
what's going on.
Mhm.
I think that's, and again, there's better uses for our money,
Mhm.
right? And
One of our representatives, Thomas Massey, a congressman out of, I think, Tennessee, I think he put forward a bill so that dual citizens cannot be, from any country, can't be senators or in Congress. Because a very large percentage are dual citizens. And it's hard to, be fair if your heart is in allegiance with another country. And so I think that might be helpful too. And maybe term limits.
well, term, that's for
Yeah,
sure, yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Have a little. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for coming. And we have one more panel, I hope. I don't know if they're here. Okay, you're here. Great. And then we're missing two. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, come on up.
Are we going to wait for the other people to come?
Well,
You have a few minutes, so
I-
we can get the.
okay, let's takes, we'll take time and
Okay.
and have some snacks and
Oh,
we'll
great.
wait. And I
Yeah.
thought they would come at 10, but it's okay. All right.
We'll just say thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
So then can I just
So we're missing one.
missing one?
We're
Okay.
missing one person.
Yeah.
Carl. I don't know if anybody wants a copy of the. Oh, thank you.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
I'm not so hearing. I was just glad there. Okay. Yes, I am. Nice to meet you. Glad to see you. I'm gonna meet you. I'm gonna have to present it against you on this day.
Here, buddy.
We'd like to hear. Sure. Looks really looks like a no.
No, it's not.
They're in the suburb, they're really.
Yeah.
So I'm like a team.
Yeah. I have to vote. Because Dad has more.
Especially when you're in there.
I told him to make it. Yeah. But I have. That's not. Oh, no. And then. And then it's one place. And so Ambrose is doing the ticket. And Mommy's looking, waiting for her. How did she do it?
She did really well. Was happy since mother. She came out pretty strong. She had, unlike the candidate, the day before, she came out with the whole PowerPoint presentation. She addressed a lot of the things that the previous candidate. Address that stuff. What I did, sure, it's not pretty good detail. So much needless to like redistribution of the part of the allocation. Yes, panics and like. It's actually leaving the go, but you know that which is where they was fall and so. I appreciate it. Something really mind. I told her, we're sitting in the area, Patricia and I are in class, and we get to King's Speech. And it's still out of not saying you won't do it. I'm pretty right. I'm hopeful, really good too. I think she's the smartest choice, especially she could hit on this her presentation yesterday was about how, like, it is good to get rid of certain perspectives, but, you know, to try and put that word and that's with 20 plus years of experience here, those that are working. Inherited this, you know, this position as we're having more massive project. I'm hopeful. I don't need meetings, but. There's better across the board, so there's, I think, the criminal justice, might be an art person in there. There's. And I've recorded you. Jennifer Egan from Blossom, Dan Beal from Ship Science, Sarah Nielsen. Oh, Michelle Flores. Environment it's that had me for speech. I speak and then one about it. Yeah. Are you gonna watch it when you get home? I don't know how, because there's a candidate, the virtual thing. But it was like, just, I'll give it to this somebody else. My makes it sound scary. So that's what we do. Only thing is. I don't think I tried. Yes, yes. Claire and multiple meetings. I know, even I had myself questioning. You know, the class staff meet and greet was that, so it was something. Yeah. This is such a mess. It is. We do this next year.
Yeah.
I really like this one.
Okay. Should we start? Angelica, Carl, and Anita.
For a second.
Angelica Alvera will discuss Black women's oppression and historically up until today, and with a focus on bell hooks work.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Angelica Olvera. Today, I want to share my reflections and analysis, as you said, based on "Ain't I Woman" by Bell Hooks. It is followed by a personal reflection on how I see feminism today. The title of my paper is "True Liberation Must Address the Oppression of Black Women." The part one of the paper is an analysis of the book. This book, it impacted me deeply. It reveals how Black women in the United States have been oppressed, not just by race, but by gender and class. Bell Hooks uses intersectionality to explain how racism, sexism, and classism don't operate separately. They overlap creating a unique experience of Black oppression for Black women. One of the first things that she points out is that Black women were not even part of the feminist conversation. She says, if we truly want liberation, we cannot treat race and gender as separate struggles. They are all connected. Hooks calls for a feminist that includes all women. She says, true feminism must recognize every woman's experience as a valid and interconnected. She goes back to the roots of this oppression, which is slavery, as some of you were mentioning. Black women were dehumanized and expected to work like men, raise white children, and endure sexual abuse. They were denied their womanhood and their humanity. White men denied Black men control, which left Black women exposed to even greater oppression. This is the masculinization of Black men was a deliberate form of racial oppression. Lack of gender recognition was affected, but also the Black man's rights were violated by forcing them to be obedient to white males to favor the social class power. Hooks explains how white colonizers brought sexist ideas from Europe and used slavery to profit from oppression as a way of capitalism. Black women were treated as machines, expected to endure abuse in silence. Through intersectionality, we see how slavery upheld class domination, patriarchal power, and capitalism. Hooks argues that sexism was a way of oppression and was integral part of the social and political order, which remains today. The political power that colonizers brought to the United States, enslavers punished anyone who resisted. This wasn't just physical. Rape and isolation were used as tools of control. Many women gave birth in captivity without care, without any diet. Many babies did not survive. The number of dead children is unknown, and the trauma was deep. Hooks also talks about how young Black girls were forced into white homes and were even exposed to further abuse. And from this came stereotypes like the mommy and the sapphire, images that erase the true identities of the Black women. Violence, rape, and stereotyping were not isolated acts. They were stripped young children on the rights, especially the sexual exploitation of young girls who were sent to work in white households after being separated from their families. Hook cites Angela Davis, who argued that rape during slavery wasn't about loss. It was a weapon of terror meant to break women down. Sadly, this system was internalized. Some Black men, after being oppressed themselves, they repeated violence toward Black women. They were imitating white males' behavior. Hooks also talks about breeding, a cruel system where Black women were used to produce more enslaved laborers. These women were not even seen as women, let alone allowed to develop a feminist voice. Other way of oppression, even when feminist movement emerged, Black women were left out again in the second way. White feminists did not speak for them or include them. They ignored their struggles. Their voices were not represented. They were silenced by both the racism and the other women's movements. Many issues happening nowadays in the world can be a direct consequence of misogynistic attitudes which have a deep prejudice against women and have remained since colonial times. That's how the system often works, sadly, to divide women, to silence voices, and turn feminism into a political tool rather than a movement for real change. Even worse, some still believe feminism means women want to take power from men or the government. But that's not what feminism is about. True feminism, as Bell Hooks reminds us, is about equality, mutual respect, and human dignity for all. That's why Hooks demands a feminism that is truly inclusive, not just for a privileged few, but for everyone. Her message still resonates today. This book is not just historical, it is painfully relevant. Today, Black women are more included in feminist movements, which is great. But they are still often feel torn between fighting racism or sexism. Their voices are often ignored in leadership roles. And when they speak up, they are labeled with harmful stereotypes, like they are like being angry. Even though they're navigating both forms of oppression every day. And the part 2 of my paper is a reflection, it's a personal reflection on how I see feminism today. This is based on the context of Mexico, but it's not very far from what I see in the United States and around the world. So these issues go beyond gender, class, and race. They're tied to other forms of oppression, which would definitely be worth exploring in different discussions. To me, being a woman reflects so much of what we still see in the world. Women continue to fight for their rights. Sadly, not all voices are heard. Some remain in silence, while others find ways to mobilize. Peaceful protests are often ignored. Vandalism draws more attention, only to be used as a way to discredit the entire movement. Too often, when some people, especially some men, and even some women who ignore feminist principles, when they hear word feminism, they stereotype women and the LGBTQ plus communities as irrational or ridiculous. In addition, feminist movements often stay centered in urban areas in Mexico, leaving rural and marginalized communities behind, which, as Bell Hooks highlights in A&A Women, reflects class divisions and becomes yet another opportunity of oppression. What some people express in marches is not just advocacy, it's pain and frustration. Yes, some people protest through anger or vandalism, and other people march peacefully. Ironically, both are often judged the same. But if no one makes noise, nothing changes. Historically, laws have only passed when there was noise, and sometimes even massive destruction. That's when the system finally pays attention. In Mexico, many feminist movements demand access to abortion, justice for femicide victims, and to end the violence. According to Lopez Colin 2025, these people usually protest peacefully, and there are very powerful movements, but they are not always shown that way. The media focuses on the negative, the elite, and even people with strong religious affiliations use those images to call feminist movements as crazy, or just they say they want to promote abortion of children. However, most women are protesting because the rights of young children have been violated, especially the rights of girls. Rape is a main issue in girls and adolescents. Many feminist leaders remain invisible, even while doing incredible work and contributing to finding people in Mexico. The silence and no recognition of voices are ways of oppression that link to Ain't I a Woman by Bell Hooks. One sign of hope is Mexico's president, Claudia Sheinbaum. In 2025, she declared this year as the Year of the Indigenous Woman, and she is promoting gender equality. Still, she faces criticism, some religious affiliations and political groups say that she promotes rituals that go against Christianity and humanity. But really, she's trying to include voices that have historically been excluded, indigenous communities. Although many groups do not feel represented because of historical oppression and high rates of violence in Mexico against women, she is implementing programs that will be a good beginning of inclusion. Overall, Hooks remains as the feminism must be for all women and for everyone seeking to be heard, especially Black women, LGBTQ plus community, and those people whose rights have been denied. She emphasizes that feminist movements need to achieve inclusion, no distinction in color or race, and without discrimination. She says it requires equality and transform society by challenging systems of domination that are basically rooted in race, gender, and class. Finally, Bell Hooks remains very relevant today, her book, especially in places like Mexico and the United States. Her work helps us understand how race, gender, and class, and sexuality, they are all connected and how they shape people's lives. These experiences of Black women should push feminism beyond analyzing gender as a separate struggle. It requires building a real social change through empathy, love, and a critical thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angelica. Your paper is a perfect setup for the next paper by Carl, who talks about femininity in structure, in language.
Is this able to connect to like a screen or projector? Because I have some slides would like go with like my paper.
I wonder if
It would be one of the
where would it connect? Where would it? Over here. If you connected your computer to that thing.
Okay, let me try.
Like that.
Let me see. My bad. I feel like I'm cutting into time. Okay, let me check. Oops, I'm sorry.
There you go, great.
I don't know. Like, just to share, does your computer have a capability inside in my license?
I have like a USB-C like thing, so like because I have to like manifest.
Yeah. You're on.
It's like this type of before. That means for like one of the big chunky ones, huh?
Yeah. So, I don't know, I know some ideas adapted to do it in the second CC. Good, so, and because she asked me to present this information, then I said, okay, so maybe if I choose something that is more fresh, it will be easier, so now I asked her to change it to this one. And she allowed me to do it. Yeah, I wonder if my parents try the see if we can find anything. I think is yeah, kind of. Oh, okay, so. What class it is? Oh, I done that.
If
It's a lot.
it doesn't work, I can like flip around like my laptop so you guys can see the presentation, and then like I can like also like view it from like my phone as well.
I don't know if it's gonna work. When you go to AirDrop, does it pull up with any specific names like Shirley 1 or 2?
No, it doesn't, unfortunately. But no worries. I think I could do it from I could view it from my phone, and then I could also like present it from here. Okay. Right. Yeah. Right. Hi everyone, good morning. Okay. So I was having sex with this guy one time. I was assuming the submissive role, him the dominant, and in the middle of doing the deed, I asked him if we could try switching positions. And then you guys want to know what he said. He was like, hell no. And he told me he couldn't imagine dominating me because in his words, I was like feminine and tiny in contrast to his like relatively muscular and like tall frame. And it would have felt like a girl was taking control of him. So I promptly got off of him because that was such a big turn off. And I asked him what would be so wrong for a girl to be in control in bed. And he told me that it just didn't feel right for him to be bossed around by a woman when he should be the one taking the lead. All right. And as crude as my anecdote may be, I feel like my hookup story speaks on a deeper level of men refusing to give women credit where it's due. Because if they refuse to let a woman take the reign during sex, like God forbid they let a woman in charge of a job, a school, or an institution, or like even their own lives, you know? Like I feel like men are so opposed to femininity that they constructed a hierarchy that puts women in a lower position than men. And that is what I'm going to be talking about in my presentation today. Taking power away from the penis, understanding structural opposition to femininity. And throughout the readings for my course, this hierarchy is analyzed best by 3 authors. Stephen Seidman, who elaborates on why hegemonic masculinity repels men from femininity. Simone de Beauvoir, who points out why men think women aren't anything without them, and Betty Friedan, who enlightens us on men ignoring women expressing their feelings about their own lives. So for our first section, we're going to be looking at how Stephen Seidman sets the tone for the masculinity/femininity theory with the idea that men are repelled by traits in people that don't fit into the standards of hegemonic masculinity, which gives us section 1, nuanced standards. So what is hegemonic masculinity? Like that's such a complicated term. It's essentially the bar set for men that formulaically lays out what it takes to be a real man. Being rich, being cisgender, being straight, being muscular, etc. And these traits were most notable during the Cold War in the USA during the 1950s, where the ideal male partner was one who was decisive, headstrong, and reliable. However, there are going to be men who don't always cross off the boxes for what it takes to be a real man under the hegemonic masculinity checklist, which has created hierarchies amongst men that define who is advantaged over another group. Like, for example, a man could be a low-income blue-collar worker and still gain more respect for his status as a man, as opposed to your stereotypical effeminate gay man who has represented a debased masculine status. So, in other words, there are certain double standards held within the pecking order of men because they much prefer a man who isn't rich but is still strong and dependable than a man who demonstrates traits associated with femininity, like being gay. I feel like this construction of placing masculine traits over feminine traits derives from men not viewing women as competent and that the ideas they represent are inferior to men's. And I actually find it interesting learning about these hierarchies from the readings set amongst men from hegemonic masculinity because I've experienced them in real life, like not just amongst like straight men communities, but also like communities of like gay men as well. Like back when I was single, I was like an active participant of like gay hookup culture, and I had a few friends who were like in on it as well. I had this one friend, his name, like let's call him Stephen. He assumed a more masculine and dominant position in his demeanor, and I noticed people would constantly favor him for hookups and target him less, despite him also being gay. Plus, that man was like built like The Rock, so I probably wouldn't mess with him either. On the other hand, I was the complete opposite. I was relatively short, feminine, and of course, my position in bed was submissive, and I was constantly getting disrespected by my hookups. And a handful of gay men would turn me down for hookups because they're only looking to hook up with other masculine men. And most of the time, I wasn't even like getting aftercare. Like, you guys, it was bad. And after reading Seidman, I'm just now noticing that I was in a hierarchy within a hierarchy of men, which is like weird to think about, but that's what Simon analyzes. And I feel like my scenario goes to show that even in a community of gay men, men who stray farther from the standards of hegemonic masculinity are favored even less. And in support of Simon, the most important idea to grasp from his reading was that gender is a constantly changing idea, and we must remain flexible to understanding its nuances. As I mentioned in my previous readings, the belief standard for a successful man in the 1950s was one who was assertive and diligent because he'd be the breadwinner of getting his loved ones out of struggling times, like during a war, like the Cold War. Yet the standard for what it takes to be a man during the mid-20th century is different for the idea of a man in 2025. And that's because people need to approach gender as a social practice instead of a fixed status or condition. To clarify, even as people learn about the past ideals set for masculinity and femininity, those social practices could be totally different 100 years from now, when thousands of new theories about gender for both men and women could have already been added on. And I see shifts in these thought processes amongst the people I see in my everyday life as well. Because another story time, well, because at work, I often hear conversations between my coworkers about their plans for the future. And in the bakery I work at, I have two coworkers who are both women, Lisa, who is 18, and Jana, who is 67. Lisa and Jana were discussing their goals in life during break one afternoon, and while Lisa just hoped to get a job and get a degree by the time she was 25, Jana was questioning why she didn't want to prioritize having a kid, because that's what Jana did at her age. And overhearing this small talk, I understood why Jana was confused. Jana was raised in the 20th century when women were limited in their opportunities outside of taking care of their kids and housework, whereas Lisa's generation is a bit more progressive and fights for women's rights and highlights that being a successful woman doesn't just mean being a good housekeeper. And as a result, I think it's vital to remain open and flexible to what masculinity and femininity mean with each year to come, because as times change, people will always interpret it differently. Now going into my next section, this one actually kind of ties in with Angelica's presentation from earlier as well. Simone de Beauvoir draws our attention towards how masculinity frames women to be subordinate to men, going as far as to say women aren't anything without men. And in this section, we will be analyzing how more of a woman, less of a human. That may sound confusing right now, but I'll dive into it. In 1953, when Beauvoir wrote her book, The Second Sex, she focused in her writing how the term man is often used in our language and media to be generalizable to all people or humans. Yet women are considered to be the second sex because they possess different traits from men, and thus we treat women differently, not as human. To highlight this, Beauvoir argues that men define women as a part of being a man and not for a woman to be defined by herself, meaning that a man's body has meaning by itself, disregarding the body of the woman, whereas the woman's body seems devoid of the meaning without reference to the male. And that was like a whole tongue twister, like it's a whole riddle, you guys. So just to reiterate that, Beauvoir underlines the societal views of women as being second to men, because even though men could supposedly do just fine in the real world without women, women must rely on men to get by. And I can apply Beauvoir's argument here to actual texts because in many real life books I've read, the idea that women are a sex that can't exist without men exists in many contexts just to uplift the position of masculinity. For example, as a Catholic, one of the most popular stories from our religion is that of Adam and Eve. And those were the two first human beings on earth who got kicked out of the Garden of Eden by eating an apple and betraying God's trust. In that story, Eve's origins come from God taking one of Adam's ribs in order to create Eve and make her the first woman on earth. And this work of literature directly acknowledges that the masculinity-driven idea that women literally couldn't have existed without men, according to the Bible. And with this piece of lore from the Bible, I feel like Catholicism, and by extension Christianity, has set the tone for societal practices rooted from religion that place an emphasis on men being superior to women through textures and Bible verses. And I believe that's why most conservative and traditional families place such a big spotlight on men being the breadwinners for the family and women being the ones who support them at home or by their side, because that is what has been taught through the church. And moreover, adding onto Beauvoir's points, the most valuable point that Beauvoir brings up from her reading is the idea of the other. And from the previous slides, the idea of masculinity frames women to be everything that a man lacks or is the opposite of, meaning the traits of women are solely based on the existence of men. And this idea of creating an opposing group to oneself is what defines the other and derives from the man's ability to think biological relations as systems of oppositions, duality, alteration, opposition, and symmetry. So this basically means that men have been naturally inclined to create systems that define one group existing and casting out the other, aka the other. And the problem that occurs from this is that by creating an other, men subconsciously become hostile and make boundaries that set them apart from the group that they oppose, which is why misogyny exists. And I see Beauvoir's perspective of the other in so many social contexts today, from scenarios as large as racism to smaller quarrels like sports. When a white person discriminates against Black people, for example, they are erecting a wall that pushes out Black people and subconsciously defines them as no longer human to the eyes of a racist. And in sports, whenever two teams are playing against each other, the two audiences in support of their side will be against the other team, raising a sense of competitiveness. And hostility is present even in that scenario, because another story time, I almost got into physical altercation at a Warriors game because there was someone on the other side, being the Warriors suck, and I almost threw hands. But that's just another idea of opposition and creating the other. So masculinity has put men in a position that makes them believe they're superior to women and makes them the other sex as a result, making them not truly human through the perspective of men. And finally, Betty Friedan accentuates people's ignorance to how women actually feel about their lives as a result of closed-mindedness. And that's what we'll be looking at in section 3. Men don't care about women's feelings. Men don't care about women. What's new? During the 1950s and 1960s, whenever a woman would have an issue with her life, she would have chalked it up to it being a personal issue or a shortcoming in her character because she was brought up in an environment that set her role as only someone who supported her husband. And that's why in marriages, whenever women in the 1950s or 60s were feeling dissatisfied with not feeling the mysterious fulfillment of waxing the kitchen floor, and they kept their feelings to themselves because they believed other women were satisfied with their marriages. And whenever they tried to bring it up with their husbands, they just wouldn't understand. And women felt such a compelling need to play their role as their husband's housekeeper that they feel ashamed of not being happy in their marriages and would feel guilty talking about it with their psychiatrist. However, what these women saw as a flaw in their character then is a realization now that they simply want something more than just a husband and kids, that they actually have a life outside of the house. Yet with how ignorant society has been to women having, feelings, men have imagined it into the heads of women, ingrained it into the heads of women, that they should feel guilty for wanting to do more in their life than kiss their husband's feet. And this argument Freedom brings up reminds me of the progressiveness of marriages since the 20th century, because women are much more comfortable getting divorced now than they were before. I was once having a conversation with my friend's mom about what would happen if she got into a major conflict with her husband that affected the marriage. And she told me that as long as her 2 kids were in a financially stable position, she'd have no issue leaving. And hearing my friend's mom talk about that made me proud because it goes to show that she hasn't made marriage her entire priority, and she reminds people to stay true to themselves before anyone else in any relationship they get into. And at the end of the day, women shouldn't feel confined to marriage, and if they do, they have every right to leave if they see it fit. And adding on to Freedom's ideas, the biggest notion to take away from her reading is that on top of how ignorant men are to women's feelings, they're even quicker to shut down women expressing their own thoughts as well. Freedom references Beauvoir's writing, The Second Sex, and how men swiftly critiqued her work, essentially saying that she didn't know what she was talking about. As a matter of fact, men even went as far as saying that she was only talking about French women and that the women problem was non-existent in the USA. Yet, based on Freedom's readings, men's argument were far from the truth because their wives in the USA were actually exhausted from slaving away in the kitchen and seeing their husbands living the dreams they could only hope for. And I feel like men disacknowledge women's feelings and shut them down so fast, not only because they believe their minds are logically superior to women's, but if they see a woman climbing towards a spot that men have already claimed for themselves, they feel threatened. And that reminds me of when I was in middle school and I was eating lunch with one of my teachers. She was dropping some insight on her life and told me how the education system has been directly set against women. Because before she became a teacher, she was actually building up her credentials to join a law firm. However, her husband at the same time wanted to join a law firm as well. And before she knew it, her husband applied to the same law firm and took my teacher's position, leaving her no other option but to work as a teacher. And I feel like that scenario demonstrates how men view women as competition once they categorize them as the other. And they will exponentially make it harder for women to succeed, especially in a field that they feel they're better at. Because in the end, the only goal bigger than a man achieving his dreams is making sure a woman doesn't get there before him. All in all, men have been structurally perceived to be placed in a position above women. And just to review, the 3 authors that I looked at in today's presentation were Seidman, who clarifies that men use the standards of hegemonic masculinity to determine who is a real man, Beauvoir, who examines how women define women as the other sex in order to make them subordinate to men, and Friedan, who looks into how men actively disacknowledge women's input because they see men as superior and women as competition fighting to take their spot. Yet, as men continue to push down femininity and keep it from reaping success in today's society, women will always find ways to deconstruct the system that's been placed to disadvantage them. Because for every issue involving gender that comes forth as time passes, there will always be communities and solutions formed to combat those problems. We couldn't imagine women leaving the house and going to a 9 to 5 like their husbands did in the mid to late 20th century, but now we have moms working double, even triple jobs to be the ones who financially support themselves and their families. Who knows, maybe one day men will even try to be more willing to let their partners dominate them in bed, because we have strap-ons for a reason. Because if women could take charge of their own careers, they can most definitely do the same in bed. And that is the end of my presentation. Here's my references.
Thank you very much, Carl. And now we will go on to Anita, who discusses civil rights and the law.
Hello, so,
Okay.
the professor mentioned, I'm gonna discuss Kimberly Crenshaw and the critical race theory. So Kimberly Crenshaw is a prominent civil rights advocate known for her work on critical race theory. She's also credited with coining the term intersectionality in her 1989 article, Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex. I'm going to call it CRT. CRT is the framework for understanding how race and racism intersect with other social structures, such as law, politics, and economics. Kind of what you talked about earlier about foster care and stuff like that, I think goes into this as well. It further examines the notion of colorblindness in social policies and examines how racism is embedded in its institutions, not just as a result of individual prejudices. Intersectionality looks at interlocking systems of oppression and how this plays out in individuals' lives. I often wonder how so many centuries after emancipation, we still have so many patterns of inequality. Lately, it seems like we're moving backwards. It's kind of discouraging. In the 1970s and 80s, society picked up where the civil rights movement left off. Despite all the strides we made during the civil rights movement, we evaluated the laws, and it did not seem like the laws were changing in our favor. Most people of color believe that to make actual change, we must do better in how we educate people about our stories, including what's in the Constitution. Personally, I didn't know much about the history of my culture until I went to college. I knew my family stories about growing up in Oakland during the 1960s, some of the stuff about the Black Panthers that they shared with me, what I was exposed to, and what I learned at school. As a parent, I try to share many aspects of my culture with storytelling through books, cultural events, and traveling, talking to other people. Brought my daughter here today just to expose her to something different. So let's see. Kimberly Crenshaw, her work discusses the importance of storytelling and balancing the voices of marginalized communities, such as people of color, women, LGBTQ, and people with disabilities, to name a few, to reveal systematic inequality. CRT is a call to action for addressing the disparities and supporting justice. There are people in our society who would like everyone to believe that we are all equal. Unfortunately, this is not the case. An example is the wage gap between men and women. In 2023, a woman made 83 cents for every dollar earned by a man, representing a gender pay gap of 17 cents on the dollar. CRT has recently been a controversial subject in society. I mean, I've seen it all around the news, just everybody, and making it almost in a negative way, right? So Senator Ted Cruz of Texas stated that he believes CRT is as racist as the Klansmen. He believes that it's racist. Some people believe CRT is racism and Marxism combined into one. This is all strategic by seasoned people with opposing views to take back power by wedging the issue, utilizing fear tactics, to combat the group of voters who won Georgia in the 2020 election. After the 2020 election, conservatives began to discuss a new strategy to abolish CRT. They needed a new slogan since they could no longer use Blue Lives Matter after the January 6th insurrection exposed that motto as a sham. Conservatives in Congress wanted to come up with another fear tactic for the average US citizen. The best way to do that was by utilizing social media and Fox News to communicate their message. The media outlets such as Fox News projected CRT as a new concern for parents. In the past 3.5 months, Fox News has mentioned CRT 1,300 times. Parents who are also GOP activists are showing up at school board meetings because they believe CRT is being taught in school, when in fact, CRT is only being taught in select law schools. I didn't know that until I did some more digging and I talked to my son. Another person who's sending the CRT negative message is Christopher Rufo. He is a conservative activist who has been quoted as saying, "We have successfully frozen their brand, critical race theory, into public conversation and steadily driving up the negative perceptions." The conservatives' main goal to create a swirl of misinformation and fear tactics within the media to create negative perspectives regarding the CRT brand. I also believe we are a product of our environment. How we grow up and our personal experiences often dictate how we perceive ourselves and others. In my opinion, CRT is a way to showcase the struggles of others, to allow us to be more empathetic to a particular marginalized group of people. In our current society, college classes are being canceled, and the media is using fear tactics to move forward their agenda. We must mobilize, get involved, continue educating our youth if we want systematic societal changes. Thank you.
Much, Anita. Okay, let's open the room to discussion. And begin with Angelica, who looked in particular at Black women and how they've been oppressed, and not just by gender and not just by social class, but also by race, and that in the 1970s, the feminist movement was all white middle class women. And they raised very important issues, but certainly didn't have the experience and background to bring other important issues that impact women and children. And so, you know, these are very important topics that you raise, and to point out that a lot of women were not part of the women's movement, and it took decades for them to enter. And so, you know, you see these ideas at constant battle, constant back and forth, to, in the end, allow more voices in, more understanding over time. And so, I think it's heartbreaking. I mean, slavery is just almost impossible to even imagine in any way. Very, very difficult. But how that impacted Black men is in the way they treated Black women slaves, having them do men's work and kind of taking away their femininity. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that? Or
I think that is a pattern that is repeating generation through generation, you know, because so Black men were treated unequal, right? And they were able to see how white men were treating Black women, right? So I think that they were imitating actions, behavior of what they saw, right?
yes.
And then since that time to now, so men had the control a little bit more, you know? And then I feel like society learn by pattern repetition. And then the thing is like we are all getting those patterns. And the thing is that we are living with those. And we are transmitting those patterns to the next generation, right?
Yes.
So, but the good thing is that at least now, I know that a lot of issues are going on, and it's very discouraging, as you mentioned. But I feel like more people is aware of what's going on, right? And there's still a lot of things are happening, and there's not a lot of representation of women in all the areas of life. For example, I have a sister in Mexico, and she is a business girl. And she said, when I was talking to her about this paper, this presentation, and she's like, you know what? But I feel, she said, that the world is not ready yet for women to have the control. She said, because she said, when I go to any conferences, business conferences, it's very sad that we only see very few people in that field. I mean, very few women in that field. She says, many of them are men, and then also we are women that are contributing with magnific ideas. Some ideas are left out. And sometimes like ideas from other women that have more power, the social class, those ideas have like better support, right? And then she said like there are a lot of division even between women. Right.
I think I noticed in visiting Mexico, the skin color thing is a dynamic.
That's
as
the
well.
only
If you look more
dynamic.
indigenous,
Yeah.
you're kind of
Yeah.
put in
Bit
a
of
different-
colorism.
Yeah, color reminds being a big challenge for challenging the obviously.
I'm fourth generation
Yeah.
here, so when I went to Mexico for the first time was with my husband,
Mm.
and I didn't. I wasn't aware of the colorism that existed there.
That's
And he's from a big city, and there were just comments like, "Oh, your children, one child is white, oh, one's more tan."
Yeah.
And then they put people in categories. It was an
Yeah.
interesting.
Skin color.
yeah, and it's like I feel like it's a pattern because I feel this is a pattern because I want to educate my children certain way, and then I'm sorry, society always tell you what to do, like you are just the woman, and then at certain age they're gonna be older. You are teaching your male children to be sorry, you are educating your male children to have control over certain things, right? Because I remember one time that my child said, "Oh, I want to be teacher like you," and then one person said, "No, why you don't want to be like something else, like engineering or something?" And I'm like, so there is division of what, like if I'm a girl, I have to be in care, caring, education. But if I'm man, I can do other stuff, right? Like engineering or anything related, So
And it's very complex because on the one hand, you were talking about how Black women slaves were encouraged to do the same work as males
yeah.
and not be able to live as a woman.
Yeah.
But today, and we think, oh, women should be able to have the same jobs as men. But all of this is based on choice, right? The problem, obviously, with slavery is that the woman did the male job not out of choice. And so that is a theft of femininity, and that impacts her relationship with men and men's relationship with themselves and community. And so it's very complicated and
Challenging.
the idea of the black male slave forced to be docile and the black female slave forced to be strong. Just this another form of trauma and assault on gender, sexuality. It's very pernicious.
Yeah. And sadly, that reminds now, like you are living in a society, as you mentioned it, so it's very challenging.
It is challenging.
It's very challenging. I feel like we will not see this happen, like any change, like we will not see this happening. So I feel like if this happens sometime, it'll be generations later. Yeah,
Yeah,
when people is more aware of things. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's you ended it with the idea of changing these dynamics through empathy
Yeah,
and
love
and love. Yeah,
and critical thinking.
and critical thinking. Yes.
Sad because I feel like those are like such important things that people don't take seriously nowadays.
Yeah.
And it's like you mentioned, like those are like things that like are like things that like are supposed to like uphold like our like systems and stuff. And I feel like structurally speaking, with like how laws are like being implemented, I think like you mentioned how like certain like programs are being cut and stuff. I mean, here at CSU East Bay, they're taking away the theater and arts department. And that's what like empathy, critical thinking, those are what make us human. I feel like when you take away like those aspects of humanity, like you're taking away the aspects of femininity, race, and those ideas as well. So it's like when you take away like one thing and like subtract from like one idea, it's a whole thing. It's like a collateral effect.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was a beautiful talk. Thank you, Angelica. Carl had a lot to say and started out with a hookup story.
Yeah.
That was fascinating. And but because the idea of equality in bed, what a thought.
Yeah.
What a something to think about, because what is femininity and masculinity?
Yeah.
And how does it work in the bedroom, especially in in gay life, where you're with the same sex, but that dynamic continues.
Yeah, I know it's weird because like what was I gonna say? Obviously, like whenever I'm like hooking up with like another gay man, it's like we're the same sex. So it's kind of like, oh, like who's like the man like in like the like dynamic that you guys have going on. And that's like something that like my like parents have like asked me before too, like, oh, like when you're like with like so and so, like who's like the man in like your guys' is like situationship going on. And it's like, well, we're both men. But like what was I gonna say? There's like these like two terms that like we use in like having like sex. There's like the top and then the bottom. I typically like bottom, so I'm typically the one that's like receiving, like, the guy. And then there's the top who's the one that's like penetrating me. And then there's also of course like versatiles and like switches who can kind of like function in between. But I guess like deciding like who is like the man or like the woman like in bed honestly comes from like traits of like who displays like more like femininity and stuff. Because whenever like I do like hook up with like guys, like I typically hook up with like guys who are like taller or like more like masculine. And then like when I'm in bed with them, like they see me as like someone who's like feminine. And like it's kind of weird to think about because like I'm a man. Like how can you like see me as like a woman? And I've had it like many times where I'm like hooking up with someone and like they like to pretend like I'm like a woman and like I'll be in bed with them and they'll be like, oh, you're such a good girl. And like, I'm not, I'm a guy. So then it's like, okay, but it's like whatever like gets you guys off, but at the same time, it's also like, can you guys like just like not imagine like a woman like taking control like in bed? And I feel like that comes from like men believing that women like can't like take control, like what as you mentioned earlier, like they're like men are not ready for like women to like take control in bed, I feel like. And I feel like it stems from not only just like not it extends to like not just them like feeling like women aren't allowed to take control, but the idea of femininity itself cannot be in control. And I feel like I think I discussed in like the second part of my presentation, because men have been structurally believed to think masculinity is above femininity. Like they can't see like the idea of like anyone like being associated with femininity being above them. So when they see someone who's like trying to like take control of that, whether it be in bed, workplace, or say like trying to like get a job, like they see that as competition and they'll do anything to like shut it down because it's like, hey, like we're the men, like we're supposed to be the one in control. And like I said, it's more than just like men being in control. It's about masculinity being in control over femininity.
And masculinity and femininity both run deep.
Oh yeah.
And you might be familiar with Judith Butler, who wrote the book Gender Trouble. But she's been, she's been very vocal about gender and gender difference. And she used this example of a young man walking along a road in rural Maine, and he was murdered. And they caught the person who murdered him, and they say, "Why did you murder him? He was just walking by himself along the road." And he said, "Because he was walking like a girl."
Well,
He couldn't, it was such a threat, he couldn't take the idea of that and had to use violence to take it out.
like they just hate femininity for real. Like what goes on in someone's head to be like, oh my gosh, that person's like running like a girl, like let me murder them. Like what? That's so
They're not
insane.
following my idea of,
Yeah.
boxed in small idea of what it is to be male and what it is to be female. And I'm gonna fix that.
That's so insane.
Well, and when you look at history of violence, and you look at who's in jail and serving prison time for violence against others, it's not usually women. And so I think it's very important to look at masculinity and how it's bound up with violence.
Yeah.
And it's and even pornography, and how pornography is bound up often in violence, cruelty.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Mhm.
Like one time, like what was I gonna say? Like I was like talking about it with like my friends, and then like we were like, oh my gosh, like what was I gonna say? Like, have you heard about like what so and so like porn star did? And it's like it's so insane, like the stuff that goes on in the industry sometimes, because like there's this one like gay like porn star who's like pretty like well known, and like he's like I don't know how to explain. He's like so like violent like towards his partners, like in like the videos. And like when you watch them, they're like his partners are like so like short, they're like tiny, like they look young and they like look like feminine as well. And like the way that like and I've heard like I haven't like actually watched it because like I could not for myself, but like I've heard from like other interviews that like he'll be like so forceful with them in bed, and it's just so like oh my gosh, like why do you guys like hate, like it's just like why do you guys hate femininity so much? It's like you guys.
And why is this person so popular? Like he's popular because somehow he's connecting with an audience that likes to see that kind of violence.
It's just so weird, like you guys, why does that turn you guys on? Like
Yeah. It's very powerful, very powerful talk. Thank you very much. Thank you. And Anita talked about Kimberly Crenshaw, who's just such a large figure because she raised the idea of intersectionality to begin with, and to look more than just gender. We're complex people. We have there's so many aspects to us that to just see someone as a race, a gender, a social class, a disability, that we have to do a better job to look at the individual and not just these fragments of them. And you did a great job discussing that and exposing how critical race theory was used as a political ploy to get more votes or to appeal to a particular type of voter. And that really all she was doing as a lawyer teaching in a law school was looking at laws and how certain groups tend to be impacted more than other groups.
Yeah.
And I think we can all identify with the idea of driving while black. You know, if you know somebody who's African American, who's black, they think twice about getting in a car. And they make sure everything, you know, all the paperwork is, because it's very real. And the idea that in addition to seeing individual human beings not just as the color of their skin or their gender, or, you know, it's you have to look at institutions like politics, law, economics, and see how all, you know, this cacophony of parts of who we are impact one another. And it's very empowering to see how you know, how important it is to continue to the civil rights movement, you know, to continue to examine law and how it's applied. And I think you did a great job talking about that and the complexities involved and how these issues will always be used by politicians in order to, you know, that's what they do to get votes. But, you know, the hard work of making, you know, to come full circle to have more love in life, to have more compassion, and to progress forward in a positive way rather than a violent way or through war and oppressing others is just something that I think we're all committed to and working on.
And I say this a lot, I'm sorry, but as a mom and I have a son in college and, you know, a young daughter, I'm always trying to tell them, you have a job too, you know, to go out there and talk to your peers, and especially people that have different views, and just kind of get their understanding, because you might be in college with a kid that maybe has just grown up around one race of people and just, you know, your product of environment, what you're taught, just have a conversation. Maybe you could learn something new, maybe they learn something new. So I think there's just more of that has to happen.
More talk, storytelling.
Yeah, storytelling, more talk. So I'm a true believer.
Yeah,
More
absolutely.
talk and more listening.
Yes.
Not to be
Yeah,
listening on the other
main-
side.
Right, exactly. There
Yeah.
could be talk, but if there's
Agreed.
no listening.
Yeah.
Good
Falls
point.
on deaf
Hard to find
ears.
listeners. because
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
distracted.
Well, fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Maybe it's a good way to spend Good Friday.
Good Friday,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'd like a group picture if that's possible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You. Do you mind?
Your guys' presentations are so good, and I liked it because they like built off of each other. I was like, I noticed it.